All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming this morning to the first session that I've attended so far today. And this is a great turnout. We have nearly 30 people here to join our panel as they talk about reimagining rural opportunities for your business services team. So I'm really excited to hear what West Central Michigan Works has to say for us today. And I want to take a moment to introduce the panel. We have Merri Bennett, who's the Business Services Director with Michigan Works West Central, Julie Sanders, who's a Business Services Representative, Mark Buss, also Business Services Representative, and Chad Marr, also Business Services Representative with Michigan Works West Central. A couple of quick housekeeping items for everybody. It looks like we're all muted in terms of our microphones, so appreciate that. We just want to make sure we keep muted. And just so everybody knows, this panel is welcoming questions throughout their presentation. So if you have something that you'd like to ask, just put it in the chat and I'll jump in and we'll get that question answered for you right away. We do have the link to the survey in the chat. I'll put it in there a time or two again. And again, just encourage everybody to give your feedback. Your feedback is appreciated. So with that, welcome, and we'll just get started.
Thank you, Holly. Again, my name is Merri Bennett. I am the Business Services Director for Michigan Works West Central. When we were thinking and kind of tossing ideas around something maybe that we could present that would help other Michigan Works agencies, economic development, we came up with the idea of rural counties, because we are definitely located in rural counties. So what the four of us are really going to address today is some of the challenges that we thought we had with rural counties, but how those really turned into some benefits for us. So in turn, we'll talk about some of the rural realities and the challenges. We'll touch on the Business Resource Network, industry sectors, USDO registered apprenticeships, Workforce Opportunity and Innovation Act, which most of you are familiar with, but specifically the WIO Workforce System programs. And then we do certainly encourage you to ask questions throughout, but we also hope to have some time at the end in case you have any questions. So, as I said, we are very rural, and I see we have some people from the Upper Peninsula on, so that they can relate to that a little bit. We cover 6 counties: Lake, Mason, Mecosta, Newaygo, Oceana, and Osceola counties. And our service centers are pretty spread out as well. We have centers in Baldwin, Ludington, Big Rapids, Newaygo, Shelby, and Reed City. So some of the realities and the challenges that we faced in the past before the restructuring was we had a full-time staff of 2 business service representatives. We each covered 3 counties. On top of that, one of the business services representatives was also the full-time business services director and the full-time communications director. And then, as many of you know, the Business Resource Network came along, and so we created that department. And at one point, along with those 2 people in business services, we had 3 full-time success coaches. So going back to kind of the rural challenges just with business services, we were spread pretty thin. We didn't have time to focus on specialty areas, and that included industry sectors, USDO apprenticeships, and certainly we didn't have an expert within business services on the WIOA Workforce System Development programs. And with the BRN, because we are so geographically spread out, it's very, very easy as a success coach to spend 3 to 5 hours a day just in travel. And I'm sure the Upper Peninsula and some of the other rural MWAs can relate to that. So the other issue, along with the geographical issue, was we all know that the BRN employer participation, and for that matter, I was thinking last night, the job seeker participation as well, it all kind of varies. It can be slow one week and busy the next week. So we kind of resigned, not by necessity, but we had to. It was necessity. It wasn't something we thought of ahead of time. So we combined our success coach duties with our business services duties. We created a full-time communications and marketing manager position, and that left us with a full-time business services director, me, and our 3 business services specialists. And they were a success coach. They each were given a specialty area. And then they also kept general business services just by the county. So they each had 2 counties. So what I'd like to do now is just let the rest of us introduce themselves, and then we'll each talk a little bit more about what they do and why they were chosen for those areas.
Sure. Thanks, Merri. Good morning. My name is Mark Boss, and I'm a business services specialist. My specialty areas include work as a success coach, support with industry sectors and related data, in addition to providing business services in Lake and Osceola counties.
So Mark was a full-time success coach when the restructuring happened, and just through talking to our executive director and what I knew about Mark, I knew that he loved data. He lived for data. And so it just made perfect sense to have him kind of take the leads on the industry sectors. And at this point, we did have one collaborative, and it was in healthcare. And Mark had a professional background in healthcare before he came into that role. So that's why it just made sense for us to put him there. And then he also had grown up and been in Osceola County for years. So it just made sense to give him that area as well.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chad Marr. I am the success coach and business service representative for Mecosta and Nuevo counties. And the WIOA workforce program is one of my specialty areas.
Yes, we were fortunate enough that Chad was a former service center manager. He was our talent development manager. So he had extensive experience working with the youth programs, with on-the-job training. And so it was just a perfect fit for us because we were able to take his experience and make it stronger within the business services team. And then Mara, you were located in Osceola County, which was close enough to Mecosta and Nuevo County. So that worked out well for us.
Hi, thanks for joining us. My name is Julie Sanders. I started as a success coach, and I continue to provide those services now, as well as my specialty is in apprenticeship success coordinator. And I also cover general business services in both Mason and Oceana counties.
And what I learned about Julie, as she said, she was a full-time success coach, is our executive director and Mark, for that matter, both sang her praises about how organized she was and how top of things she was and what a great worker she was. And so since she was living in Oceana County, it made sense to, on top of having her do the general business services for those 2 counties, to teach her about apprenticeships, and she became our apprenticeship success coordinator. So since Julie was one of the first full-time success coaches, and she was very, very good at it, I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about what some of the expectations were with the BRN before the restructuring.
Okay, thanks, Merri. As Merri said, I was one of the first BRN success coaches, and I really began to see how important this role was, both employers by assisting them and employees by assisting them one-on-one. As a success coach, the main focus is to remove barriers for employees to make sure that they can sustain long-term employment. We all know the tremendous retention cost to employers, and we know that in 2021, those costs are probably going to go far, far beyond what we had expected. Well, there will also be additional further employee retention issues. I've also noticed that when listening to employees, sometimes their issues are personal. Sometimes the barriers that they're facing have nothing to do with their work. They may have issues with a car. They may have issues with daycare. They may have issues with gasoline or some other rent. It might not have anything to do with their work or their work environment or even their training. But sometimes I could pick up on issues that did have to do with work related. So I could start to notice what needed to be done in the position as the employee, and then maybe even looking at the position as the employer, what kinds of training might be needed, what things could be done above and beyond the BRN in order to help the employer as a whole, more of a holistic approach. So I began to get a sense of training needs, company culture that could really best be served by someone directly in business services, which would lead to another person, it would lead to a referral, and then another point of contact for the business. So we knew that one point of contact was going to be really important. Next slide. Yep. In a small rural community, many times our businesses have only one human resources member. That person could handle everything: payroll, insurance, safety. They might even be the owner of the company. So sometimes, as compared to a larger company that has an entire department dedicated to human resources. So the smaller rural companies, like I said, usually have a staff of 1, maybe 2. They don't need 4 or 5 or 6 different people to have to contact every time they need a different service from Michigan Works. So in our combined role of business services and then the BRN Success Coach, putting those 2 together, we depend on a strong relationship with local employers, and we can focus on developing a real sense for the company relationship and the company culture. As we work the Success Coach side of the business, it allows us to cross-sell or cross-develop, if you will, the business services side. And in companies without the BRN program, we could go in there on the business services relationship and possibly sell the BRN program. So we could work both angles for companies regardless of how they chose to begin talking with us. They might end up with 2 programs that they really weren't even planning on. So all in all, by combining BRN and business services in a small rural community, we were providing the human resources team one single point of contact for all their needs and giving them some superior customer service.
Julie, can I ask a question?
Sure.
How many companies do you have in your BRN?
I don't know the exact number. I would say there are about 10 between our 6 counties.
Well, each of you know how many employees you cover though,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So Julie has
I cover 1.
I have 7 in Osceola, but a few of those are trials.
And then you have how many?
I have 5.
So
So
13.
12, so it's 13. So we have 13 total.
Interesting. Are you guys doing the collaborative with the BRN where you have the companies come together and meet and look at like regional community issues, things like that?
Well, I know with Mason County, we have an ERN there, which you all know is the equivalent of a BRN, and they do meet on a monthly basis and talk about those issues. Like right now, they're using a book, right, Christy, to talk about employee retention?
Yes.
Yes. So initially, I think that we wanted to start out with that, but it wasn't a part of business services then. So I think you guys just reported individually, right?
Yeah, and Holly, early on before the pandemic, we were meeting quarterly with our BRN members. The pandemic did really put an end to that. And we've recently actually just been able to get back into some of our places in the last few months. So there's been a disruption in what we intended to do to begin with. But yeah, we used to meet quarterly. We bring them in around noon and have a short program, have lunch, and just discuss what was going on to see what was working, what wasn't working well.
Thanks.
Sure. I would think too, we're going to talk a little bit about time management and how that played a role when we did the restructuring. Did you guys want to touch on that now or after you go over this, Julie?
Yeah, we can talk about time management right now.
So before the restructuring, I don't think any of you felt you had a time management issue. You felt, yeah, you were there, but when we did the restructuring, did it cause you guys to reevaluate that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, I take the approach now, when I go on site for a BRN meeting, I treat it like a project. I take like a holistic approach. I'm able to meet with the employees, of the company, and then I can also meet with the HR department. So it's kind of nice to get a feel for the culture and do business resource network and business services at the same time.
Right, like Chad said, when you're able to, when you integrate in the company, I guess that's the difference between the way that I'm working now and the way I worked as when I was solely a success coach. I'm on the floor in a lot of cases. I work with the managers in a lot of cases too. In addition to the employees, and like Chad said, HR is a huge piece of that too. You kind of become part of the HR team. So when Going Pro is going on, you might be fielding a question about Going Pro. In addition to questions from, you're shifting constantly. You're working with clients on the floor. you're working with management, you're working with HR. And because we're the single point of contact when you're there, you're more than BRN. That's what's different now than when I started and I was just simply a success coach.
It said it's almost like a weekly retention visit.
Right.
Yeah, it is.
Where we can, and COVID helped us to change that around a little also. Once we started with COVID issues and we were doing everything virtually, we realized how much could be done virtually, which freed up our time a little bit, which allowed us to handle our time a little bit better too.
Absolutely.
So are you guys doing like OSMIS data entry for your success
Yes.
coach work?
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
We're going to touch on that a
We'll
little
talk
bit
more
later,
about
yeah.
that too a little bit.
Okay.
But yeah, we do all the OSMIS for the BRN.
So Julie, given the restructuring, we already talked about what we attended outcomes, but this is really what kind of and happened afterwards, especially with
Yeah, what we thought would happen when we combined the two positions is that we would support employees. The BRN agreement would be ongoing. You know, we would build that trust. We also could depend on the HR group. They could depend on us. And then we had data to support the program so that we could show it to other employees. And Mark will talk just a little bit and show you a couple slides about the data.
Sure. Thank you, Julie. In front of you is a screen, which is an example of the data that our success coaches, the three of us, would provide to companies that participate in our BRNs. We report categorically on both the numbers of services provided in the defined period, in addition to the dollar amount of support that is paid by our agency on individual requests. In addition, the bottom of the report indicates an unduplicated number of employees that were served during that reporting period. And to further answer that question, Holly, yes, we do report into OSMIS. In addition to tracking in Salesforce, the basis of the report you're looking at right now, that came from Salesforce. And I think this is meaningful because remember, BRN is a confidential service. And while we can't and don't report on individual activity with our employers, this is one neat way for us to say, this is the data for the quarter or a defined period for your company. And what that does for the company is they'll see where the struggles are. And a lot of times they'll look at this and they'll say, you know, it makes sense to me that the automobile related expense would be the major portion of what you're paying out, because we know that people have a difficult time getting to work. You know, we know that cars have issues. And it's neat to have a conversation, to have that data, as opposed to just saying, hey, we're doing a lot of services here. And if they have questions, we can drill down into data. And again, we're not going to give any confidential information out, but we can give additional detail if they're wondering about a specific category. The neat thing I think that I like to do is to report on the number of employees served, the non-duplicated number, because every now and then someone will say, I wonder how this is working for retention. And they'll give us a list of employees and we can just look at our list and we'll get a percentage, for instance. We've done that before, again, without disclosing who's had the service, but it just gives them an idea of how it's working. So the data is important, and it's something that we're all either asked to give or we just give it to them on a periodic basis. Are there any questions on any of the data?
I have lots of questions.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you guys mind if I ask a couple?
Please do.
Are you guys still using Community Ventures supportive service dollars right now?
I think those ran out.
Yeah,
I don't
think so.
Now we're using the BRES.
Okay.
Very
we just
remote.
talked about that this morning, about shifting from CV to BRES. And I was just going to tell you guys just a really quick anecdote. I was on the phone this morning with one of our success coaches, and she was telling me she just got a new referral. Well, they voluntarily come to you, right? And he's been working at this company for 3 years. And for the whole 3 years, he has to borrow his landlord's car in the morning to get to work and get back. And so, you know, just like where you guys are, the transportation is the number one, absolutely by far number one issue here.
And no public transportation, so it's a vehicle or a share ride.
Yeah, auto expense is usually at the top of a lot of our list for services.
Mm-hmm.
And I should mention too, before the restructuring, BRN was not under the business services umbrella.
We started that way too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like I said, kind of out of necessity, we kind of had to do some redesign. Did you have anything about this data, Mark?
Were there other questions on that previous slide, Holly?
Nothing in the chat yet, you guys.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. This is an illustration of how we would report collectively in an aggregate manner. Tracking some of the metrics as we would for an employee report. We use this format to communicate our results to board members, for instance, and of course this is done again in a confidential manner. This just shows, again, when we would have our board meeting, just to give an idea of how things are going within our companies, we would just show aggregate data. We would also list down the bottom the numbers of or the companies that we're in, just so board members kind of had an idea of what the membership in the BRN was like. We brought this basically to the Rotary clubs in our area recently to talk a little bit about BRN because people in the Rotary Club had experience with it. Their employees were using the service, and they had talked to Rotary members about how it was useful in getting employees to come to work, basically. And again, a lot of that revolved around auto repairs, gas cards. If a person had difficulty paying for fuel, we had been doing quite a bit of that too. So again, just a way to get the message out to a broader audience, and we all very welcoming of any time anyone wants us to come in and talk about our, not only BRN, but it's a great segue to other Michigan Work Services too, to that group.
So again, I think the benefit of bringing that data into the business services team is, like Mark said, not only when business services representatives go out and speak to public groups, you have that information to share, but without revealing the confidential information, it's also information that you can share with other employers to get them interested in the BRN. So as a result of all of that, we had our intended outcomes, and then these were the additional incomes that we weren't expecting, right, Julie?
Yeah, this a couple of things that we just didn't really realize was going to happen. So above and beyond our expected outcomes, there were so many additional outcomes, as you can see up here. The employment, the human resources group had a familiar face. You know, we could have conversations with them. We could have honest discussions with them. They got to know us and we got to know them. We got to know their culture a little bit more. Our relationship building could go far beyond the typical Q&A. We could go beyond that with an employer. We could really learn about the culture. We could ask maybe the little bit tougher questions. They were more comfortable answering those questions with us, and they felt very confident that we had their best interest in mind. And then probably the biggest additional outcome that we really didn't know was going to be that important was the employer really had a desire for a one-person point of contact. They really like to have one business card and one person to get a hold of, and that makes their lives easier, which is important to us. So now we'll talk about some industry sectors.
I'm just going to let Mark touch briefly. I think we might have missed a slide. No, this is yours, Mark. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. As some of you already know, the Michigan Industry Cluster Approach, or MICA, creates a framework in which employers within a single industry engage with the workforce system to identify their demand. The hub of the cluster is the MWA service provider with in-depth knowledge and workforce issues for the industry.
So before the restructuring, and actually this was several months before the restructuring, when I first started over 4 years ago, some of the myths that we had and the things that I was told was that rural areas really didn't have industry sectors. There was no need for them. And that was for a couple different reasons. Number one, we didn't have enough employers. And the few employers that we did have weren't really interested about it. When in all actuality, it's not that our employers weren't interested, they didn't know anything about it. And then, of course, we had the challenges just with the geographical isolation and everybody being so spread out. Well, then the MICA 2.0 grant came out, and we actually learned about it not only from our TDL, but I was part of the TPM Academy. And so they talked about that quite a bit. And so we just kind of thought, well, maybe this is something we should go ahead and apply for and see what we can do. And then the other thing that really helped us, and this was quite of a surprise to us, was that after we were approved and awarded the funds, then COVID-19 hit. And I think it ended up helping us, which we'll talk more about. But at that time, I think everybody was scared and everything got turned upside down. So Mark, who is new to the industry sector, is going to cover what we did to help.
Right, and I did start this job, I think, the month that COVID did hit.
Yeah.
But in addition to the challenges that Merri spoke to, COVID-19 added yet another layer of difficulty in our efforts to develop our healthcare collaborative. Bringing collaborative members together in the early months of the pandemic seemed almost impossible at the onset, and our large geographic area only added to our concern. Merri, did you have anything else you wanted to add after that?
Yeah, Mark he's going to talk a little bit about how we use Zoom in the virtual environment. That actually increased our participation because we had already been awarded the grant and COVID hadn't hit yet. So we tried to do our first couple of meetings in person. The attendance of the first meeting was very, very small. And then the second meeting, our employer champion was 3 hours away. And so even though she really wanted to come to the meeting, she wasn't able to attend. So then after COVID, and we went to the virtual participation, our first meeting that we had after that, I would say we had a 99% participation rate from the employers because it was just so much easier for them to log on for a couple hours than, again, pretty much spend 8 hours a day in travel.
So like Merri said, we soon learned to adapt by engaging members to the virtual environment, in this case, Zoom meetings, and found that to be an extremely effective way to engage our participants. The next slide. Mm-hmm. We were also fortunate to have chosen healthcare as our industry sector for the obvious reason that healthcare workers were in critical demand during the pandemic. While many non-essential industries experienced slowdowns or closure, the healthcare industry was eager to tap a job-ready pipeline of trained professionals as an answer to critical staffing shortages in a high-need industry. As a result of the high demand for healthcare workers, we were able to meet and exceed our metrics under the MICA 2.0 grant. Workers trained under this initiative migrated into employment within our employers from our collaborative, assisting with the fulfillment of demand for essential workers. The outcomes provided through trainings can be demonstrated in our data to both employers and job seekers as meaningful achievements.
So really what happened, we were gathering the BRN data. I was thinking about that last night, but we weren't really sharing any specific wage data. So what happened as a result of MICA 2.0 is we actually improved our internal collaboration as a team, not just the business services team, but with our case managers in all of our counties. Because part of the quarterly narrative was we had to provide that data that showed the wage increase before the training and after the training. So Mark was constantly reaching out to our case managers so we could gather that information. That in turn also improved our communication with all of our departments. I, in all honesty, had never had a grant before where I'd communicate with our finance department on a regular basis. This was the first time I had to do that. So it actually helped me as a business services director learn a lot more about the budgets, what was involved, how to spend them, what not to spend them on, that kind of thing. And then the biggest thing too was, like I said, even though we had been collecting the BRN data, not the wage data, so we had the data to go ahead and provide not only the employers that were a member of the collaborative, but to our job seekers overall as well.
The significance of this slide is actually the story behind the data that's displayed before you. Going back to the barriers we discussed earlier in our presentation, our efforts in bringing people from minimum wage jobs into high demand and high paying careers was achieved despite our rural geography and complications of the pandemic. Our data gives us insight that our actions could be replicated successfully across our industry sectors, other industry sectors, despite the challenges posed by our rural geography. Were there any questions at this point, Holly, on data?
I don't have any questions in the chat yet.
Okay, and moving on, this slide provides the proof of what working together across both agency staff and county lines was able to accomplish. I'd like to talk just a little bit about the basis of this data too. And Merri spoke to this a bit earlier, but we had to gather data from talent specialists across multiple counties, and it's really difficult with all of the metrics that we had to track under this grant to do that in Excel in shareable fashion. That's when, about the time that we brought Salesforce in and started to utilize it across the agency, kind of a systemic program, I guess, entry program for us, a reservoir for us to put data. So we weren't trying to maintain multiple Excel spreadsheets, some, that could be shared, some that could not be shared. It was all in one reservoir. And it really started to make things much easier when I had to go and gather data under that MICA 2.0 grant. All the metrics were in one place. I could perhaps put it in Excel, pivot on it, but just the process of gathering that data was really facilitated through having a common platform across all counties.
I just wanted to add too, because this was important to me as the business services director. When we got approved for the grant, I didn't know this wage thing was going to work out the way that it did. Because as I said, we were showing the BRN data to the board, but when I was able to go back to the board as a business services department and show them the difference that we were making in these job seekers' lives. I mean, the RN wage increase for me really hit home, because a lot of people think, well, the rural MWAs aren't able to accomplish as much as the urban areas. And to me, this proved that yes, we are. The numbers might not be the same. We may not have the same number of applicants. We may not have the same number of applications for the Going Car Talent Fund, but when you look at that increase of 223%, to me, that proved that as a rural area, we are making a difference, and that was very important to me.
And again, with this slide, when we can go out in the community with generic data like this, it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to illustrate it. And when people see that in our community, people are going from a minimum wage job to a living wage, that really adds credibility, I think, to our programs and our work here at Michigan Works. So with BRN, we've done it with MICA, and I think we're just trying to demonstrate with data, anytime we can, the impact that these programs are making in the community and the way that they're impacting people's lives.
So the next area we wanted to cover was the USDO registered apprenticeships. As many of you with the MWA agencies know, when we were tasked with that about 4 or 5 years ago, we knew very, very little about how USDO apprenticeships even worked. They had the modules, they had the trainings or the whatnot, but we really still didn't know the ins and the outs and how it all broke down. So myself and my other business services manager, who I should say is who I keep pointing to off screen, he's now our communications manager, he and we would try and do the best that we could in covering all 3 counties when we met with employers. But again, because we didn't know, we knew how the funding worked, but when they would ask us specific questions about the apprenticeship, we didn't have that knowledge. And so the referral process, by the time, we were able to go ahead and get the information shared with the U.S. Department of Labor, in many cases, it just became long and it became complicated and the employers would just walk away from the table. The other thing, we talked about that with the BRN, but as many of you know now, we have to enter that apprenticeship information to the OSMIS, which for those of you not with the agency is the one-stop management information system, which is how they used to track that. And I can tell you, I, as a business services director and our business services representative, had no idea at all how OSMIS worked. So the restructure turned out to be a good thing there too. Right, Julie?
Yeah, we use OSMIS a lot in the BRN, and now we're using it in the apprenticeship data as well. So by combining the success coach and the business services role, I've really been able to concentrate on creating USDOL apprenticeships, telling employers about apprenticeships, showing them some current apprenticeships and helping them build their own. And by learning the system, learning how to use OSMIS, learning how to use the USDOL agents to help us, we can help employers see the benefits of creating their own apprenticeship program. And when we're in the small local businesses providing business services, we can work one-on-one with whether it's the supervisor, the plant manager, the owner. We can talk about training needs, what kind of needs can be duplicated, because we know with an apprenticeship program, they can duplicate that over and over and over. Once they have an apprenticeship program set up, they can put multiple employees through that and end up with a good training program that works the best for them, really closing the skills gap for their current and their future workforce. So as most of you know, when creating a US DOL apprenticeship, sooner or later, OSMIS comes into play. And being, like I said, being a success coach, we've already put a lot of stuff into OSMIS, and the US DOL apprenticeship is really just putting in two more screens into what we're pretty familiar with. So it has made that much easier than Merri thought it was going to be. So that part turned out to be not so bad. So it's many of these small day-to-day functions that has really made a big difference. Bringing some of the BRN stuff into the apprenticeships, maybe bringing some of the business resources stuff into the BRN. It's combining a little bit here and a little bit there, like we talked about earlier. That's really helped us with time management, and it's created the beauty of the combined position. Mark, did you have a story about a grocery store?
I do have an example, Julie. One example of how our overlapping roles was useful occurred when a new grocery store and meat market came into one of our communities. We already had a relationship with this company through helping them with job fairs and hiring, but they were having a difficult time finding meat cutters. And we asked if they were interested in USDOL apprenticeships. I brought Julie in along with myself, and we met with them to discuss their needs, and we reviewed the job descriptions, and they agreed that this definitely would be useful to them. An unintended result of that relationship was their agreeing to participate with BRN services. So again, we were able to fill a couple of gaps that they had and help them with retention and maintain a great relationship with this company.
Yeah, I think the other benefit of that was we have a similar employer coming into one of our other counties, and we are confident enough that once we get that apprenticeship approved to serve as the intermediary on that as well. So that's another benefit that we can offer to the companies by being able to have Julie do that.
Do all their paperwork for them. We know that they hate all the paperwork.
How long have you guys been an intermediary?
We've been, how do I say this? We've been trying for several months, but we're getting a lot closer. So does that answer your question, I hope?
Yeah, we just, I don't know, like 5 weeks ago, got our standards approved.
Yeah.
It's not a quick process.
No, none of it is.
So real quick, I just want to talk about the WIOA opportunities with workforce system programs, because before the restructuring, we didn't really have one expert as part of the business services team. So I'll let Chad talk about that.
Sure, thanks, Merri. Yeah, before the restructuring, our business service staff knew the need of employers. However, we didn't know a whole lot about our own talent pool sometimes. And on the other side of the house, our case managers were a little bit new in their roles, as we previously had contracted service providers. So they weren't real understanding always of the needs of the employers. So what we did is we identified a gap. So we wanted to bridge the gap between business services, case managers, as we just felt still a little bit siloed. So in saying that too, it was also difficult for the business service staff to advertise WIOA programming when we were on retention visits and such, because we just weren't that familiar with the programs. So after restructuring, we had a better knowledge of the programming on the business services side. We were better able to bridge that gap between departments. On occasion, the business service team can be brought in on a meeting with WIOA case managers. So we found it was a really good space to just communicate, find out what kind of individuals we had in training programs, and as well as the needs of the employers. So that was really good. having that single point of contact for the employers is nice also to be able to advertise the programs. We also found that we're able to advertise better. So with business services staff also being success coaches and knowing WIO programming, we're able to offer that to employees when we're as success coaches. So a good way to bridge the gaps, and that worked well for us.
I think a good example of that, Holly, would be where our Economic Development Association in one of our counties included Chad on the retention visits. And in the past, when we would have that type of situation, we were able to mention on-the-job training or incumbent worker or the youth program, but then if the employer had more specific questions about it, we had to hand it off to a case manager. And so that, again, just made everything become longer and a little more complicated for the employer. And as Chad mentioned, we were contracting those services out back then. So unfortunately, there were a few times where we didn't even know what the follow-up was or what had happened. So by bringing Chad in-house, he's able, under business service, I should say, he's able to explain those programs, and we're able to follow up with employers, which is very helpful.
Absolutely.
That's
I think it's
really interesting. Are you guys doing incumbent worker?
Mm-hmm. Yes, actually, we have a pretty big project in place right now. I'm glad you brought that up. That's another really great example. I can offer success coach services and work with the HR department on Going Pro Talent Fund and incumbent worker training.
Which you're doing.
Which I'm doing. That's actually a success we weren't going to bring up. Thanks for asking that. And again, we can't say and speak enough to the single point of contact. You know, this HR department is obviously, way overworked, and they don't have to call 4 different people. They can go right through me for all the programs, or us, I should say. Great question.
So back to general business services, where we still feel the county connection is individual and important, are with the general business services, the Going Pro Talent Fund, things like that. So again, Mark covers Lake and Osceola as a success coach and with the general business services. Chad covers Mecosta and Newaygo, again, with success coach and general business services, and then Julie covers Mason and Oceana.
Mary, I've got a piece on that too. I just wanted to explain. While we do each have assigned counties, we also cover for each other. We work very closely with each other. And
especially the BRN.
Right. In an effort to get more immediate resolution to problems, we like the concept of warm handoff. So if one of us is not there, we email each other, we talk to each other. We know that if something comes up, that individual at the other end of the phone can get a live person to talk to. They're not just going to get a message that we're out. They can get resolution right away if they're willing to work with someone other than their assigned success coach. So that working together is really important for us.
So yeah, just quickly to go over the counties with the general business services areas, that obviously includes the Going Pro Talent Fund. But as Chad mentioned, he was also doing the BRN and the incumbent worker training at the same time with this company, and they still had the one point of contact, so that worked out real well. Pure Michigan Talent Connect, obviously we help employers with that. The job fairs, we feel, is also a very important area to keep those county relationships. For instance, Chad was the business services specialist with a large employer that came into one of our counties, and he was able to work with the staff at the service center to help them with everything they needed.
Yeah, that was another great space too. Once we had a single point of contact, not only did we help staff and host the job fairs, we're able to sit down and talk about incumbent worker training, youth programming, Going Pro Talent Fund. So it was a really good way to introduce programs when someone new comes to town.
But especially, these numbers might not seem a lot for urban areas, but we were able to fill how many jobs?
Like 70 plus.
And we had how many on the waiting list?
It's 20 plus.
So for us, those numbers were huge.
Yeah.
And again, those are numbers that we can go back to other employers, job seekers, board members, everything. And then the other one I felt that was real important to maintain those individual county contacts was definitely with rapid response. You guys may have similar situation, but 90% of the time we learn about rapid response either in a newspaper article or on social media. So because we kept those individual county contacts, we've had several situations, including one with Julie, where the employer actually came to us first.
That was really nice. We had built up our relationship with the employer on a one-on-one with the Human Resources Department. And when they knew that they would be closing down, we were their first phone call. You know, not the newspaper or not through one of their employees telling somebody. They called us first. And that was really nice to know that we had worked real hard to develop that relationship. They called us first. We could provide the rapid response right away. And it really kind of completed all that work of building that relationship.
And I would say that's definitely something we drill into our board members as well. Whenever we have our board meetings, you know, the earlier we know about something with rapid response, the quicker we're able to help them. Instead of when the employee's already gone and laid off and then we learn about it. So we've had several instances where our board members have contacted us as soon as they've heard from an employer as well. So that works great. So overall, just looking at the results of our restructuring, which I'm going to tell you, just being honest, I was a little apprehensive at first. I didn't know how this was all going to work. But thanks to the team that I have, I don't think we could be doing a better job. It's when you have a small team and you have to wear multiple hats, this seems to work really well for us. It's definitely improved communication internally as well within the organization. We do have a ways to go, but it's definitely a great start. We know that rural areas can provide challenges. We are fully aware of that. But I think what this whole restructuring did was made us remember how important it is to focus on positive. And that's what we did. And that's what we've been able to continue to do. So some key takeaways, I think, and the reason we wanted to share this with everybody else is between a small team, even with the collaborative efforts, like Mark mentioned, we're able to still help that company by providing a single point of contact. By combining the success coach duties with the business services duties, they are, wouldn't you guys say, much more quickly able to learn about a company culture.
Oh,
Absolutely.
much
Right.
more.
Because they go in and they hear from the employees, but then they can turn around and talk to the employer and kind of meld all of those concerns and everything together to get a broader idea of how the company works. And then the biggest takeaway for me was the extreme benefit of collecting data in a rural area. I didn't know until I saw the data that Mark started to put together with those wages. And again, for urban areas, this is a no-brainer. They have a team. They already knew how to do that. It's easy to share the information. And while we were doing that with the BR, and we really weren't doing that with the wages. So our next goal is to start another collaborative and do the same exact thing.
I've got something I'd like to add. When we're working in these small communities, we kind of become the face for Michigan Works when we're out in the community. And we don't do all of this ourselves. We have some really talented staff back in our agencies that we may be referring people back to. For instance, if they say someone's having difficulty with a resume, we can refer them back to a talent specialist, or they want to talk about setting up a job fair. We're doing a lot of that and having a lot of success with getting people in the door to those hiring events, and actually even having a good fair amount of success with hiring folks in these small areas. So we really do, we're lucky to have the staff back in the agencies, I guess, to give the support to the clients. And it's just another way, it's another segue to get people in the door to take advantage of some of these programs.
And just speaking a little bit more on that collaboration, I think that's, I mentioned improving the internal communication, but because we are so spread out rurally, it is a challenge for business services to communicate with the other side of the house. Sometimes we get a little lost in that. So I think what Micah 2.0 really helped us improve upon, and we're just continuing to improve, is just reminding us all that we are all the same team. We are all there to do what we can. And the more that we can educate them about what we do, and the more they can educate us about what they do, in turn, just helps all of us together.
Agreed.
So it doesn't appear we have any comments. or questions, but did you have anything else, Holly, that you could think of?
Yeah, when you guys are cross-training in OSMIS, do you also cross-train on like general eligibility requirements, WEO requirements, all that like file management stuff?
No, not a whole lot. We know some of the basics, especially if we're working with an employer. We'll advertise the program in a broad term or a broad sense, so they fully understand the processes, the steps, advantages, disadvantages. However, to drill down to actual eligibility, our great case manager staff will do that.
But yet, with your experience, you do know a lot of that.
I do, yes. Yeah, I can answer some of those questions. If an employer would ask me, for an example, is everybody eligible? I would have the knowledge to say, no, there are certain requirements. And at that point, I do the warm handoff to bring them in.
Okay.
And the other important piece of that is it's real important that the employer knows that we follow up. If we don't know the answer, we don't know all the answers, but we definitely will follow up because there's that expectation that if they ask us, we'll get the answer for them.
And I think my whole thing with the restructuring was, yes, the handoff still does take place, but it takes place later versus sooner.
And differently. Incumbent worker, for example, I was able to answer just about all the questions, and then I just looped in a talent development manager and a case manager in the company. You know, the employer already knew what to expect. They knew this was coming. They knew the process. So we just did the warm handoff and it went seamlessly.
How do you frame that that conversation with an employer when you have to talk about, well, someone's going to come here and do this paperwork with your people? Like, how do you talk about that?
You know, I explain it up front and I'm open and honest. You know, let's say we'd had to do a contract or some paperwork with HR. I would say, and there's a second step. This is what the step looks like. This is the timeline. This is the information that we may need, just so it's expected. And we're really flexible. For instance, you know, we would go to the company, you know, on their terms at their chosen times and make it as easy and quick as we can. So
I think one of the things I would like to see as well, especially given some of the benefits of a virtual environment, is I don't see why there's any reason that with an employer, we can't have, i.e. the business services rep and the case manager kind of meet with the employer at the same time.
Yeah.
And address some of those issues. I think that would be a good idea.
That's a really good point you bring up though, Holly, because with our services, it does seem somewhat invasive at times when we're, for instance, in a company with BRN. And I ask that question of employers, and this is just one example, but when you're there, you're aware that they have a job to do. People have a job to do, and the employers are seeing the results. And what I'm hearing from employers, and I'll be very conscientious of their workers' time, but they'll say, you know, Mark, if a person has an issue, they're not here. We would just assume they're talking to you. It's okay if they're talking to you. We're going to give them time. And I think with our other services, our employers are okay with our intervention in their day because they see results. And again, being able to give them some data that's actionable in some means they can look at and say, you know, we're seeing benefit with this. So yes, it's fine.
Okay, great.
I think the other biggie too, and I didn't realize this until we did the restructuring, was just how much that does make the employers trust you as that single point of contact.
And that's very important.
Whereas if you weren't a success coach, and previously when I was a business services representative, I would have to work a little harder at gaining that trust, whether it was taking, you know, a tour of the factory or whatnot, where they've kind of got that trust built in already.
Trust is a huge piece of this.
And being a success coach, you know, we're not to say forced, but we have to work with the HR departments. That's the job. So it's so much easier after that relationship's built to segue into other programs and discussions.
Thanks, Holly.
Excellent. Yeah, no, thank you. I'm really glad that I got picked to moderate this particular panel. Choices based on anything, but it worked out great. And so thank you for this excellent information. I really took a lot from it. I'm sure my team that's sitting in did as well. They're quiet, not asking a lot of questions, but they know I'll ask the questions for them. And I'm just going to remind everybody, I'm going to put the survey in the chat here again. And please take a moment to do that. There's lots of thank yous coming in for you guys. For those of you who attended, thank you for your time. Please take a moment to attend the exhibitors hall. You can watch videos and interact with those people. There's also an opportunity to pick the networking icon. It's like a handshake type of icon. And the way that works is you get 2 minutes and you get connected in with somebody else who wants to do some networking. So there's some virtual networking available. So thank you all for attending, and Michigan Works West Central, thank you for your time.